So let me call tonight's Schultz lecture to order. We are the great beneficiaries here of John Schultz's leadership, vision, and generosity. I'm not sure exactly when the conversation happened with my predecessor, David Getchis, and John, but it went something like, wouldn't it be great to have a lecture every year on energy law? That was before energy law was as obviously important as it is today. And I believe we're going to have Ann Getchis here tonight. There she is. And that was an inspired suggestion. Subsequent to that conversation, and in line with the vision that John and David had, we have renamed the center, the formerly known Natural Resources Law Center that David helped create, to the Getchis-Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources, Energy, and the Environment. Because the world we live in today is a world where energy is at the center, literally and figuratively, of many of the environmental issues and the natural resources questions we're talking about. Today, as we sit here in Colorado, there's not a single more timely question than the challenges around what has literally been a transformative revolution in extraction of oil and gas. The world that John Schultz grew up in knew fracking, right? Knew horizontal drilling, but the combination of the two took us from a plan to import natural gas to a world of us being quite possibly energy independent and an exporter of natural gas. An extraordinary revolution which is raising all sorts of issues around what people call fracking for short. And for this year's Schultz lecture, following some real distinguished folks, this was an issue that was on my mind, and John's. And William Boyd, who couldn't be here tonight, directs our Energy Innovation Initiative, said we need to get an oil and gas company CEO. I had the good fortune of meeting Jim Burke. I'll let Britt do the official introduction. And what we looked for was a true entrepreneur, someone who cared about the ecosystem, someone who cared about good public policy, and ideally a graduate of the University of Colorado if we could find that to boot. And that was indeed who we found in Jim Burke. But the other part of the story that I now get to do is introduce Britt Banks, who is a savior for this story. So we set up this Getchis-Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources, Energy, Environment, and we had a challenge. Who could help lead this effort to bring together the faculty, the community, and help us raise our game? And we had a member of the advisory council. He was reluctant to take this on because he had a successful career in the natural resources space. But thankfully, after some cajoling, Britt agreed that he would take this on. And he's been an extraordinary leader for the center. He, much more than I, appreciates the vision I outlined. And I want to give him a chance to talk about the center and introduce Jim. So with great appreciation, Britt, please take the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Phil, and thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. So, as Phil mentioned, the center is sort of in an evolution. We started out as the Natural Resources Law Center a few years ago, but we have expanded our mandate, and that an important part of that expansion is energy. And what used to be called, or what is still called, the Energy Innovation Initiative was formally folded into the center in July of this year. And it's now an integral part of everything that we do. And William Boyd and Sharon Jacobs and our faculty are very important pieces of that puzzle. We also have an advisory committee for the Energy Innovation Initiative, and our speaker tonight, Jim Burke, is a member of that advisory council, as are many of the other people in the audience, Teresa Rice, Kate Fay, a number of other people. So we have a lot of people engaged on these issues. It's important. We have a lot of people working on the water side of the equation who are also starting to interact with the people who are working on the energy side of the equation, which fits exactly with what this topic or this talk is about here tonight. Is the Oil-Water Nexus and how environmental issues and water issues come to the fore when we're talking about this new energy revolution. So with that, I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker and let him get on with it. Jim is a graduate of the University of Colorado. He has described himself as a serial entrepreneur, and I think his record certainly bears that out. He's got over 35 years of experience in the oil and gas industry. He's founded a number of companies that he has either sold or merged into other entities. The last of those was High Sierra Energy, which merged with NGL Energy Partners a couple of years ago. And Jim is now the president and a director of NGL Energy Partners. And I'm going to let him tell you more about who NGL Energy Partners is. He'll have a lot to talk about that. But one of the absolute cornerstones of their business is technological innovation and working on issues relating to water handling, water recycling, water use in the oil and gas industry. So I think we have a tremendous amount to learn from him tonight about this whole suite of issues. So with that, let me introduce our Schultz lecturer tonight, Jim Burke.
Thank you, Britt. I'd also like to thank Dean Weiser. He's quite a salesman. It had to be slim pickings for him to pick me, but I'm very honored to be here. Also like to thank the Schultz family. And with that, I'd like to get on. I'm gonna have a slide presentation today because I have a lot of statistics to put on the board. So if you would follow along with me, that'd be great. But we're going to talk about the Oil-Water Nexus, where development meets the environment. And we, as NGL Energy Partners, are very conscious of that. We're very passionate about that, and I'm going to follow through with that. So I'll describe very briefly who NGL is. I'm going to give an overview of the shale revolution, unconventional energy, rig locations, where it's happening without the country, break-evens, which is a hot topic now with the price of oil falling $20 a barrel most recently. I'm going to cover the growth and the volume for the future projected out. And I'm going to cover in great detail one of the big challenges, and that's water. The challenge is twofold, with water being used for fracking, large volumes of water being used for fracking, and even more, as important or more important, the large volume of water being produced. I don't think many people realize the amount of water being produced along with the associated oil and natural gas. Then I'm going to get in great detail about the water development nexus, the supply chain, comparison of the basins, water demand for fracking, time plays. I'll get close to home and cover the Denver-Julesburg Basin, which I consider our backyard. And then I'm going to talk about water management and the technologies from low tech, where it still is in a lot of cases, and to where it's going. With that, I'll let you all read forward-looking statements. We're a public company, and I've got to put this up here, so we'll take 1 minute and go through that if we could. NGL Partners, Energy Partners is a publicly traded company, New York Stock Exchange, NGL. We're a midstream company, and what midstream means is upstream are the producers of oil and gas, downstream are the refiners or processors, the end users of the product, and we as midstream company provide the infrastructure or use the existing infrastructure to get that product from the origin all the way to the end market. That could be pipelines, that could be storage terminals, that could be rail cars, trucks, tows, barges, whatever it may be. However you can move it, we do that at NGL as far as crude oil. Within the business units, we've got 4. We're throughout the United States, and we are in Canada also. We start out with water solutions, which I'll cover obviously in great detail later on. We have capacity closer to 700,000 barrels a day. Some of these slides are dated. I've been traveling a little bit. We're closer to 700,000 barrels a day, and we run a capacity at several locations. Within crude oil logistics, we are the good guys to the producers. We actually physically go out in the field, and we're the ones cutting the checks to the producers, the independents and the majors alone, separate from the independents. We cut the checks and pay them for their production. And they entrust in us getting that to the final market I described. And we own trucks, we own rail cars, we own terminals, pipelines, storage. So like I say, any way we can get that crude oil or condensate production to market, we do. Natural gas liquids, including retail propane, I put that in one category, it's actually 2, but natural gas liquids, primarily propane and butane. We've got a wholesale arm within the company where we buy and sell from the manufacturer and deliver to the end user. And we also store it during the seasonal plays in which the refiners don't need it. And then we also take that all the way to retail propane. We own several retail propane outlets and companies. So we actually take it from manufacturer to retail propane, eliminating 3, 4, 5, 6 people in the middle of that chain. Works out really well for us. And then refined products, we have 300,000 barrels, 23 million barrels of storage. We do 300,000 barrels a day. We buy, sell, market, transport, and store throughout primarily the South and the East. Within crude oil, we've got about 8 million barrels a day of storage at Cushing, Oklahoma, which is the central exchange point. 3,000 employees. Market cap is lower than this. The stock market's been bad. I didn't get a chance to change that. The areas of operation around here, I'll let you all take a look. The red circles are propane, retail propane. Green circles are natural gas liquids. Blue circles are crude oil. We've got barges. We've got pipelines. We've got water facilities. We're in several parts of the country and most of the shale plays. NGL Water Solutions. We design, build, own, and operate. We're a little different than most. We don't go out and contract and build something for the producers. We want to go out and contract the producers, solve their problems for water, contract out several years if we can, and do the most economical and environmentally friendly thing for that producer. Our core competencies are disposal, which basically is drilling a disposal well. I'll get into more detail of this a little bit later, but disposing that water, and we've got over 600,000 barrels a day capacity, closer to 700,000 barrels a day right now. And most of that water goes down disposal wells, although I'm going to get into technology of where we've gone with this to take it farther. Treatment for reuse. We've actually run through patented processes, and we can actually take that water that's produced from the oil and gas wells, and we can actually take that, treat it enough for recycling for that producer. And of course, that saves the local aquifers, the rivers, the streams, whatever it may be, the local supplies. Recycling is an important part. In some states where we can't use or disposal wells are not economic, we can actually go in and clean the water up through 14-step multi-patented process and make a better than distilled water quality. And I'll get through that a little bit later too. And we take that better than distilled water quality and we actually re-inject that back into the tributaries, the rivers and the streams. And resource recovery, this is new for us. We can actually go in and do all of the above with the addition of extracting some valuable chemicals. Hydrochloric acid, bleach, several high-value chemicals that we can take and sell into the wholesale chemical market. Once again, reducing that cost for the producers because we can make money on the chemicals in addition to the disposal fees. We operate a state-of-the-art research and development facility near Stapleton in Denver, 10,000 square feet. We have full-time water chemists on board, and it serves us greatly. What it does is it gives us a chance to test water from all over the country. We don't go out and just build a facility and try to make that water go away. It tells us what we can do with that water to what degree that I've just described and what it costs per barrel down to pennies per barrel to do. So very environmental conscious, and the economics work out great for that producer. Basins of operation, as you can see from the map, we're in most of the shale plays. We're in North Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, several parts of Texas, working on a project in the Marcellus, and we cover a lot of territory. Where most of the prolific shale plays are, we are. Closer to home, NGL in Colorado, we have 450 employees. As I said, we purchase, market, transport crude oil. We're actually building a sizable pipeline, 120,000 barrel a day pipeline, to get that product from the field and into the final market at Cushing, Oklahoma, the central exchange point. And this is big for a lot of reasons. It's big because the pipelines are full. The production has become so prolific. People are having to rail crude oil and condensate out of the area by rail car or truck it out of the area, and it's much more expensive. Pipeline is always the cheapest alternative. So this results in a higher netback for the producer at the lease and makes the basin much more sustainable as these prices have fallen. We dispose, treat, recycle over 100,000 barrels a day right now of water within Colorado, primarily the Denver-Julesburg Basin and the Wattenberg Core area, which is the center of the basin. We're expanding with several plants as we speak right now, 7 or 8 different plants we're building to expand, and we will double that volume in 1 year. We'll be at 200,000 barrels a day by next year this time. And of course, we transport, market, finished products through the company here in town, Transmontane, we obtained. Now I'm going to get through as I said, I'm going to get through the unconventional energy development and the market overview and cover some topics. I'm just going to put all these up here at once. It's much easier. I didn't realize they all came up separately. Up top of the pyramid, this is a nice chart. It simplifies things substantially. This is pretty much the way it was years ago. Conventional reservoirs, small volumes, vertical wells, easy to produce, becoming harder to find. Because they became harder to find with the advances in technology and the production techniques, we've gone down to the shale plays, down in the corners, the gas hydrates in the shale plays, and much larger volumes are to be found, but they're also it's much more increasing technology required, and it's much more expensive. The good news there is the rates of return are a lot better. Because you're finding such volumes, in some cases 5 and 10 to 1, versus the vertical wells, the old conventional plays, the returns are much better. So that's why the basins are taking off the way they have. Comparison to conventional and unconventional oil and gas. Conventional gas resources, we just discussed. Oil and gas resources, it should say. I call it the good old days. This was vertical wells, easy to produce, easy to develop, but as I said earlier, much harder to find. That versus today, the oil and gas can't be produced without large reservoir stimulation and fracking. Fracking, of course, high pressure, large amounts of water with some sand and some chemicals injected into the well to fragment or stimulate that rock in the formations. Low permeability porosity, meaning tougher to get it out of the ground, as I just described. And it includes coal bed methane, tight sands, and shale gas. U.S. active rig locations. I'm going to go with directional first. Directional wells are in blue, and this is today, pretty much today, May 21st of 14, and not many directional wells. Directional wells haven't been the mainstay. We go to vertical wells. Vertical wells are red. The good old days again, although they're still drilling vertical wells in certain plays. And I guess this is the amazing thing. If you look now with the green dots, this is the horizontal wells. This is where they go down several thousand feet, turn the corner, and catch a big piece of that formation. Right now, the horizontal wells are about 3 to 1 versus vertical wells, and it wasn't long ago that they didn't exist. Great slide, I think. Oops, so good I went right by it. This slide is a 15%. These numbers on this map of the United States represent a 15% internal rate of return in the various basins. With $70 oil, a lot changes. $80 oil, it's of course much more efficient to produce. 70 gets tough in some of these basins, as you can see with the Uinta Basin and the Bakken, the Mississippi line, in Kansas and Oklahoma. But you get down to home, to the DJ Basin, the Wattenberg that I described, and $46 is a 15% internal rate of return, which is good for our economy and good for our area in that we've got some sustainability with lower oil prices. U.S. field production, within the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually come back and we're close to the 9 million barrels a day we had in 1985. We're up about 1 million barrels a day per year the last 2 years, in the past 24 months. And what's interesting about this slide that's not on here, though, what's interesting about this slide is if you add natural gas liquids, meaning the propanes and the butanes, those commodities produced from the natural gas, the liquids produced from the natural gas production, we're at 12 million barrels a day. And 12 million barrels a day should ring a bell because that puts us at the top of the heap as far as the world, as far as total liquids production. February 89, I'm going to put all of February 89 up here all at once so we can see this. February 89, we had a lot of production from Alaska North Slope, as you can see up there. We had a lot of production from the Permian Basin, West Texas, eastern New Mexico, offshore, Gulf Coast, Oklahoma, Wyoming, and of course the arrows are the imports coming in. We imported a lot of crude oil with the old vertical wells. We didn't produce much. Fast forward to November 13, and we've got Texas just going crazy. Both West Texas and South Texas. The Permian Basin is West Texas, eastern New Mexico. South Texas is called the Eagle Ford play. Alaska drops substantially. California drops. The Bakken comes into play. The Bakken was almost non-existent in '89. Bakken's massive play right now. And as you can see, most of the light sweet imports have gone off the map. And that's because with the shale plays, the unconventional shale plays, we're producing a lot of light, sweet crude oil. So most of the light, sweet crude imports have gone off the map. We're still importing sour because years ago, the differential between sweet and sour was such that sour traded at a significant discount to sweet. So a lot of the majors in the refineries geared up to run sour. So what I think will happen is separate from exports, because I can't answer that question. Separate from exports, my guess is some of the refineries are going to gear up to run light sweet crude because it's going to trade it won't trade at that differential anymore as sour. It'll come closer, much closer in. We go to December of 18 projections. And we see the Texas basins, the Eagle Ford and the Permian, just going crazy. Permian alone, West Texas, eastern New Mexico, are rumored to be at 2.5 million barrels a day or more, and higher than that in December of 18. Eagle Ford, 2 million barrels a day. The Bakken, I've heard anywhere from 1.5 to 3 million barrels a day. The Bakken goes crazy. Alaska continues to dwindle. California drops a little bit, although there is a play in California called the Monterey Shale, which has a lot of promise, massive reserves. The technology is not quite there yet to produce it in the volumes. Getting into water and energy development. Unconventional energy depends on water, both to supply it, as I said, and to make it go away. Water is used to stimulate the well versus hydraulic fracturing or fracking. And it does take a lot of water. Now, in the overall scheme of things of the water supply, the amount of water used for fracking is not that great. It's a small percentage in Colorado versus agriculture and other uses. But as far as the disposal, we're producing an awful lot of water. It has to go somewhere. Water comes out of the well in two forms. It comes out in what's called frac flowback, and that is literally the frac water being flushed through the system. And once that ends, it turns into produced water. Now, what produced water is produced from the oil and gas wells and reservoirs, in most cases for the life of the well. So it isn't just water coming out one time for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. It comes up, and of course it declines with the production of oil and gas declining, but most of that water is produced for the life of the well. And of course, water is inherently sustainable. It never goes away. It just changes form and changes quality, and we like to change that quality in the most environmentally friendly way we possibly can within the economics. The water value chain, first of all, you have to identify a water source. Streams, ponds, water wells, you name it, whatever it may be. You've got to get it to the well site or a storage point of which you can pipeline and truck it to that well and then get out by pipeline or truck. Then, of course, it's injected in the well for frac, as we've talked about. The flowback and produced water come back. And I'm going to get into great detail as to the different technologies and what happens to that water, but suffice it to say, it goes to treatment to separate the oil from the water, the oil sold, the commodity sold, and the water goes into either a disposal well or it's taken farther downstream, which I'll go through a little bit later. Frac volumes for different basins. Bakken, of course, is North Dakota, Denver's backyard. Marcellus is Pennsylvania primarily, Eagle Ford, South Texas, Permian, West Texas, and the Utica, Ohio. The Marcellus and Utica, Marcellus is primarily a gas reservoir, so not a lot of water is produced coming back out. But plays like the Permian produce an awful lot of water. Bakken doesn't use as much as the Utica. Utica uses a lot for fracking. And the percentage of flowback, which comes out prior to the produced water, is listed up here. I'll let you all take a look. It's roughly 15 to 40% of the water coming back is flowback water. Per well water production, Permian Basin, West Texas. In some cases, we find that there's 5 barrels of water for every barrel of oil coming out of the ground and more. So that gives you an idea. If a well's producing 1,000 barrels a day, which a lot of wells are now with the horizontal production, you may have 5,000 barrels a day of water that needs to find a home and go somewhere. Bakken not as high. Eagle Ford not as much, and as I said, drops to DJ. Our backyard, the Denver-Julesburg Basin, is about 7/10 water to every barrel of oil. Marcellus is a small amount of water, but still. Going into the local example of the Denver-Julesburg Basin, if you consider us at 200,000 plus barrels a day right now, which is absolutely phenomenal. I've been doing some things in this basin for a long time, and I can remember 10,000 barrels a day in the whole basin. But if you look at the amount that's projected out from now until 2018 and even beyond that, I've seen projections out to 4 to 5 to 600,000 barrels a day of oil. And at 7/10, it's just an approximate number, 7/10 of oil to every barrel of water. You're talking over 400,000 barrels a day of water that has to go somewhere. Disposal wells, I think I've touched upon. Disposal wells, you drill several thousand feet below the water table. You encase that hole with steel and concrete around the outside of the steel for integrity. The water is separated from the oil. The oil is sold. You try to do as good a job of separating the oil from the water as you can because the commodity is worth a lot of money. And the water is injected into that well, into a deep reservoir with good acceptability or permeability and porosity to accept that water. We've tried to put pipe in the ground. Trucking water is the way it's happening most of the country right now, but putting pipe in the ground saves the producer money in a lot of cases because trucking is very expensive, as I'll get into. And it also gets trucks off the road, eliminates congestion, if you will. Treatment for reuse, I touched upon this earlier. Basically, we can take that water and where it's economically feasible, we can run that through a process and we can turn that water into frac quality either to deliver back or sell back to that producer. Reusing that water, saving the local aquifers. Treatment for discharge, I think I touched upon this too. In areas where disposal wells are not conducive, meaning the injectability, the injectivity, or the permeability and porosity of the wells won't take a lot of water. Because it's expensive to drill a disposal well. It can cost up to $10 million inclusive of your surface facilities, depending on the size. So you really can't drill a $5 or $10 million facility and put down 1,000 barrels a day. It just doesn't work. So we've got technology now where we can go out and actually run that through all these processes, separate the oil from the water, deliver back for fracking. In this case, take what we can't put down a disposal well, we can actually turn it into better than distilled water quality and inject into the tributaries and the rivers, replenishing the supply. Resource recovery is new. Resource recovery does all three of the above. In addition to that, we're able to extract very valuable chemicals, hydrochloric acid, bleaches, things like that for resale in the market. What that does is we're able to do that it also helps the producer. We're able to do that at a very economic advantage to that producer because we're able to sell the chemicals and save that producer money. This works in areas like the Marcellus, where there are very few disposal wells within the basin itself within Pennsylvania. And in a lot of cases, they're having to truck the water from the Marcellus, both the wet gas area down south and the dry north area, and truck it up to $10 to $15 a barrel to make it go away. So in lieu of that, we can build a plant out there, pipeline connect, separate, deliver back for frac, and also recover the chemicals. And it's a much better alternative for that producer, and it's a much better alternative for the environment too. Obviously, disposal is low tech. Resource recovery is high tech. It's priced accordingly. Disposal fees in most basins for just the disposal and separation of the oil run about 50 cents a barrel for the produced water. The flowback water is a little harder to treat, to take care of, so it runs a little bit more. It runs probably $1.50 to $1.75 in a lot of basins. And of course, this doesn't include hauling costs. As I said, trucking is very expensive. The trucks in hauling water are very small, roughly 120 or 130 barrels. They aren't the big tankers you see on the side of the road hauling finished product or crude oil. And so trucking water for $1 or $1.50 a barrel is almost unheard of. It's $2, and in some cases quite a bit more than that. So putting pipe in the ground is not only environmentally friendly, gets trucks off the road, saves the producer money, and so on. Conclusions. High internal rates of return incentivize drilling activity. No doubt about it. The rates of return in this basin at these prices are 50, 60, 70, 80% internal rates of return. Some were 100 with $100 oil recently, so I can't tell you what they are at 80. They've come down, but they're still very, very profitable. Horizontal drilling activity is the largest driver of the water production. Quite a bit different than the vertical wells. Quite a bit more water is used. Quite a bit more water comes back. In some cases, 5 to 1, as I've illustrated. Frac volumes and geology determine flowback. We've got full-time geologists on board. We go out and find the locations, pick the best spots for the locations for our facilities. And treatment, recycle, reuse, and disposal. Typically, disposal wells are the cheapest alternative, but where we can and where it's economically feasible, we take this as far downstream for that producer as possible, whether it means recycling, injecting back in the river, mining chemicals out of the water, whatever it may be. And water management is a key component to help sustain the shale revolution. What I've tried to point out is where we've gone. In fact, even prior to this, disposal wells, pits used to be common. Now, our company, NGL, considers pits prehistoric right now. But pits were used way back when. And I'll give you, for instance, and I'll close, but the way we got involved in the water business in 2005 was actually bought a company that was a pit disposal company. And at the time, that's not long ago, 2005, it didn't seem out of the realm. It was in southwest Wyoming. It still is in southwest Wyoming. And we would take the production from the field by truck, several trucks running into these pits, put in the truck, and the pits dispose of it, and it would evaporate. Well, that worked fine, except for the field turned into the 6th largest field in the nation at the time, Pinedale Anticline Field. We ended up with millions of 2.5–3 million barrels of storage, and we still couldn't make that water go away. So we contracted out with some people that had some great experience that went out and developed the technology that we have today to recycle, to separate the product, to recycle, and put it back in the river. And that's really how we got in the water business and where it's at today. So that's the direction we're headed. We like technology within the water end, and we think that it's headed that direction. That is it. I think we're at questions and answers.
So we do have a local custom, which is the first question to go to the students. And I'm not going to call on any if none raise their hand. Plus we have Professor Davis back here who tried to cast a ring with the audience. All right. We'll let Professor take it, and then you got to give next one you can follow your students.
Thank you. My question has to do with the regulatory environment. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the regulatory environment in which you're operating, and maybe a little bit about how differences in regulatory schemes from state to state have affected your business operations.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to start within Colorado, and I'm going to turn the state to state over to Greg, our water expert over here, Greg Blaze, who works with me. Within Colorado, the disposal wells themselves go through the COGCC, Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. That's for the wells. The surface facilities, meaning the holding tanks, the separation equipment, et cetera, go through the county. So that goes through the county. And the recycle operations go through the Department of Public Health and Environmental. So we've got 3 regulations to go through in Colorado. We're very well regulated in Colorado. We think we are. Outside of Colorado, in Wyoming, for example, where we inject in the river, we're subject to the Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. And Greg, you want to cover Texas?
Sure. Texas is actually managed by the Texas Railroad Commission. They're traditionally responsible for all water management within Texas. It's a pretty holistic group. They pretty much take care of regulations, whether it's disposal or recycle. And I think the question was, well, how do changes affect that? I mean, obviously, we don't operate unless we're operating within the limits of the law. So we are very adamant about keeping track of current trends, future trends, and trying to get ahead of those so that we don't get caught flat-footed, by being out of compliance in any way, shape, or form.
I guess in addition to that, we've got to have permits to drill the wells. We apply for permits. So we've got some things to go.
Let's go back there.
As far as your disposal wells go, how have you had to make any adjustments to how you consider potential for induced seismicity?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I kind of.
For your disposal wells, how have you had to make any adjustments to how you consider potential for induced seismicity?
Greg, you want to cover that?
Yeah. Could you explain what that last phrase is? Yes. A lot of us are not quite as inside baseball. You can explain that. Induced I would call it seismic activity. I'll probably kill the word that you just mentioned, seismicity. It's obviously been a very it's in the news now more than ever. It's become a growing concern. It's kind of caught a lot of people off guard within the industry, especially regulatory, in the regulatory environment. Right now, most regulatory agencies are looking at what kind of policies they want to put in place in light of some of the recent assumptions that there's a correlation. We go through a seismic study every time we put a new well in, and we basically hire a geologist, a specialist who goes through, and I don't know the details of the analysis, but every well is actually vetted for its location in terms of seismic activity. That's not always been the case. A lot of the wells we purchased that have historically been operating for quite some time don't have any record of that, but all new wells going forward have that backing.
Somebody had a question right there.
So referring to regulatory, things you might have to deal with in the future, you mentioned you're always trying to kind of stay ahead of the curve. Is there anything that you anticipate or that you're looking at right now that might come along? Specifically, maybe like federal regulation?
Sure, yeah. Regulations state by state are either managed by the state or managed by federal. And I can say most of them are managed by the state that we work in. The only exception would be Pennsylvania, which is managed by the federal EPA. We don't see any drastic changes coming when it comes to mandating reuse, mandating limitations on water abstraction, treatment, or the government getting aggressively involved. We do see changes in the issue about probably seismic activity. If I was going to say, what's the biggest trend out there when it comes to regulatory environment that we're trying to make sure we're ahead of, and that could have the biggest impact on the industry, it would be the seismic issue.
Well, I was surprised about how much water is produced from these wells, and I think you said it was not coming from aquifers. So is it just mixed with the oil in the shale?
It's from the natural formation.
Okay.
It is.
So could you explain why the public is so upset about fracking? What is it that they're so concerned about?
You can take a chance at that? You want me to?
Well, I think everyone's got their individual concerns. I don't know if there's a one or two or three issue topic. I think everyone's got individual concerns. Some of the big ones we see are obviously contamination of the groundwater. That was the first one. I think when fracking really kind of came out and became very popular, there was a lot of misconceptions about contamination of the groundwater. I think that's slowly been diminished by some very clear description of exactly how disposal works. The disposal wells are so much deeper than the aquifer that really the chance of some kind of contamination through injection of the salt water in a disposal well is really very limited. The only chance you're going to get some kind of cross-contamination is if there's a problem with the well casing. And you're going to get that in all wells, whether it's a saltwater disposal well or whether it's a production well. If you don't case the well correctly, you can cross-contaminate the resource or the salt water with the aquifer, and that's across the board. So that's not unique to fracking. So I think that was one of the biggest concerns. I slowly see that becoming less of a concern. The next one is just the sheer amount of water that we use. This is an issue, especially because most oil and gas production is in arid areas, where water is a scarce commodity. And so, although a lot of times people say, well, if you look at the big numbers, total amount of water used for fracking compared to, say, agriculture is minuscule. Well, that's true, but you're not growing corn in, western Texas where water's scarce. And so that becomes a very regional and very kind of location-specific type of concern, and a valid one. For a long time, producers thought they needed to use fresh water to frack. I mean, you're fracking a well, they just believed it had to be fresh. I mean, they're drilling a $10, $20 million well. They don't want to take any chances by putting something down that well that could risk the production of the resource. And so they started with clean water, and then they would add their frac chemistry and use that to frack the well. Which we've learned there's been a very big learning curve in the fact that it doesn't have to be clean water. You don't have to use clean water. So right there, you're using significantly less. clean water than they were originally. And so that's kind of taken a bit off the resource.
Actually, we have producers in town here, sizable producers of oil and gas that say that our recycled water is better than fresh water for fracking,
Yeah,
which is real positive.
Yeah, there's the salt in the produced water have some benefits to fracking. It's a heavier water. The other concern, so I said, water contamination, groundwater contamination, water use. The other one is trucks. There's a lot of trucks. Most of this water is moved by trucks. You get it out of the source, wherever the source is, that's a truck. You get it to the well, that's a truck. You get it out of the well, you move it to wherever if it's recycled, that's a truck. If it's recycled, it might be a truck going back to the field. A lot of truck miles, a lot of trucks. That's become more and more of an issue, more and more of a concern. That's pretty much the bigger complaint that we hear right now, is just the amount of truck traffic. And there's a very easy solution, it's pipe. We have the only produced water pipeline in Colorado used for commercial activity. Most produced water pipelines are on the lease themselves and they're regulated by the COGCC. Our pipeline actually leaves the lease acreage through private property, public property, to a facility. So that made it become managed by CDPHE. And it's the first time they've ever had to deal with this. And so we work hand in hand with CDPHE to advise them and to educate them on, what's the appropriate amount of safety, engineering, redundancy that's required to make sure that there's not an issue with this pipe or produced water leak. Produced water is piped all over the world. This is the first, all over the country. This is the first time it's been piped in Colorado off of leaks. And it's very effective. It's very cost effective. And so most producers are looking to go with more pipe.
Greg had to bring up that word engineer. He's a graduate of University of Colorado Engineering School too. So. Had to throw that in, didn't you?
All right, working around, starting over here.
Yes, I understand that the hydraulic pressure fluid that you use, they don't reveal what the chemicals are that are in those fluids. Is there some reason that they don't do that? And has any, like EPA or government regulatory body, do they get told what those chemicals are so that they can figure out whether or not there is some hazard to them?
We're not producers. We don't put the secret sauce down the hole. So I can't really speak from firsthand. But my understanding is they don't share it because it is their secret sauce. It's unique to their understanding of the geology, their understanding of the hydrogeology, their experience with fracking wells. And that's why they don't want to share it. But I understand that's changed quite a bit. There's a website called Frac Focus. And from what I understand, and I don't know if it's in every state, but it's mandatory to do actually publish the frac chemistry in certain states through Frac Focus. So that has changed quite a bit than when that first initially became an issue and everyone was concerned, well, what are you putting in the water? What's actually going down there? Nobody really knew. The industry responded by saying, okay, well, we don't have to be so tight about it. Maybe we won't give the ratios or the proportions of the amount. At least we'll tell you what it is.
Yeah,
we'll tell you what it is as a total of the water.
So my question is regarding UIC Class 2 wells, and I was wondering what federal regulations do you specifically have to abide by in the design of those wells, and how has the regulatory environment for this changed over the last 5 to 8 years or so?
That would be more of a question for our geologists and our permit specialists. But yeah, all of our wells are UIC Class 2.
What is a USC Class 2 well?
Ooh, underground. Smart people in the room. Guys, we have job applications out front. And we have not seen, there are no significant changes that I'm aware of in the last 5 years that have changed our business model when it comes to UIC. The designs haven't changed. We haven't seen any change in design. We haven't seen any proposed change in design. I think the only change is potentially on locating them and as a result of seismic concerns.
Around here, a couple more.
So in terms of the cross-contamination, do you monitor and analyze groundwater to ensure, it doesn't get cross-contaminated?
No, we don't, and that's not a requirement. there have been a number of studies that have looked at it, especially in Pennsylvania. It's a real hot issue in Pennsylvania. People have seen the movie with the flammable faucet. There have been quite a number of studies that have looked at that particular issue, but we don't specifically, and nor are we required to.
In your discussion, you mentioned the fracking wastewater byproducts, and I believe I heard you say that some of that water is actually treated to distilled water quality. Okay, and the other thing that you mentioned was the wastewater byproducts sale value or reuse value for community water communities like public water users. The question is why would you take the fracking wastewater and refine it to distilled water quality, which nobody, I mean, that's something that you have to create on your own deliberately. And the second question is, has NGL or anybody else actually refined the wastewater byproduct and in fact sold it to a community user?
I'll answer the first
do you understand that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll answer the first
Thank you.
part. We turn that produced in flowback water into a better than distilled water quality because the disposal wells aren't a good alternative. In the region we do this in southwest Wyoming, the permeability and porosity, or the ability to inject water back in the ground, is very poor, and the wells are very expensive to drill. So the alternative before we devised this technology was to truck it $8 or $10 a barrel away, where disposal wells were an alternative, a viable alternative. So what we did was went through and we said we either dig more pits, which was a really bad answer, and we look back today calling it prehistoric, if you will. We don't use pits anymore. We don't develop pits. And we said we developed that technology so that the producer didn't have to truck it $8 to $10 a barrel away, and we could do it for quite a bit lower cost. Now it's much more expensive to do that than just use a disposal well, or even run it through part of our process to turn it into frac quality water. But we do all of those. We take that and we separate the water from the oil, resell the oil, and then we take it and we deliver as much as we can back for frac. But they can't use all that's coming out of the ground to frac the wells. So that's when we said, let's take it one step farther, and we inject it into the New Fork River, which is a tributary of the Colorado River. Vast water system. And we're tested on that. We have a lab on site, and we are tested by the state on that too. The water going in the river.
Jim, let me follow up on that question, because from what many people would think is that everyone in the industry should be doing this today, and that's not the case. And part of my conjecture, being a little bit of a lot of an outsider, is oil and gas is a very insular, conservative group of leaders who've done things the way they've done things. So how is it that you have the perspective to think different about how to solve this problem? And why is the rest of the industry a little slower to get there?
I think it was the gentleman and his partner that we contracted out. They had a vision. It's an interesting story. I don't want to take a lot of time on our company, but we had long-term contracts to take this water and make it go away. So if it didn't work, we had to truck it $8 or $10 a barrel away, and it wouldn't have been a very profitable situation for us. We'd have to go back and renegotiate with those producers. But we did find some people that had the expertise that could develop technology. We went out and developed a pilot plant for a year. And we ran a pilot plant, which was a fraction of the cost to build this plant. This plant's a 60,000 barrel a day plant capacity in southwest Wyoming. And it worked. And we've taken that technology and we've used it to take part of that. It's a 14-step multi-patented process we have. We've taken that technology and we've used it to take a portion of that 14-step and produce frac, not having to go all the way to distilled, where you can recycle a lot for frac, or you can inject into disposal wells. Does that answer your question?
I think so. You need to refine the water to the degree that it actually is acceptable to a porous injection well.
Correct. The geology in the area was such that disposal wells, there are disposal wells in the area. We have a disposal well in that area, and it handles 500 barrels a day, And it cost a couple $1 million to develop, that location.
And the second question that's more of interest to my discipline is, well, the bottom line is money rises to the surface figuratively of every endeavor that we do. And have you actually embarked on selling your water to public users? No. Okay.
We've not, no.
Yeah. Is that something that you're considering?
It's something we have considered and we look at from time to time. The problem is, in a lot of cases, let's take West Texas, water's under 50 cents a barrel. So for us to process that water to a degree they can use it is going to be more than 50 cents a barrel now. In very scarce regions where water is a very valuable commodity, that it becomes closer to being economic, but it's not there.
Okay, thank you.
Huh?
Jim, do you see the technology and cost of treating produced water and having it usable for fracking and well development purposes getting to a point where that can be done industry-wide in the near future? And second question related to that, do you see also a potential regulatory requirement that producers be required to do that before they compete with freshwater supplies as a result of that changing cost and technology?
First part of that question I'll answer, we see it becoming more viable. Is it economic? It is for us. We've got the lab. We test water all over the country. It's not economic all over, and it's a wash in some cases, and it's a loss for the producers in some cases. It actually costs more. But in some cases, these large producers have edicts from the board to start recycling and using recycled water, which is perfect for us because we want to do that all over if we can. But it gets back to my answer to the other gentleman in front of you earlier, in that water can be very cheap in certain parts of the country. It's increased in parts of the country. It's gone up in Colorado, for example. But the recycling can cost more, and it can be economic, and in certain places it's not. It's not close. Does that answer the question?
No, do you see that changing though? I mean, I know people are working hard on this technology all over the place. Do you see that as a long way off before all produced water can be used as a source and eliminate the competition with freshwater supplies?
I do, but then I've been wrong before. I didn't think we'd be doing recycling and building plants like we are, and I didn't think we'd see as many pipelines being laid in the ground as we are. We've got 9, 10 pipeline projects right now we're putting in the ground, which in the long run saves the transportation for the producer and gets trucks off the road, which is a great answer for all of us. So I've been wrong before. I told our board, in fact, our board argued to me, they said, this isn't going to happen very much. I've got a board meeting next week, and we've got 9 projects right now to put pipe in the ground. So.
Just a real quick comment on that, though. What we're seeing is, the second part of your question was, do you see industry or regulatory environment changing to force recycling? We don't, only because the industry is doing it themselves. Most industries, most producers will tell you they recycle 100% of their flowback water, and they do. They realize they can use it. They realize that with minimal treatment, it can be used and used over and over and over again as the field goes on. What happens? What the problem becomes is logistics. Then it becomes less economical to move that water as they get further and further away than it is to dispose of it. And so they do recycle it as much as they can, 100%, until it's just not economical to get it from here to 50 miles away. That's when they start getting a disposal solution. And then you get into the issue of produced water. That's the flowback. That's that big slug of water that comes out first 2-3 weeks. But that well continues to produce water throughout its life. Maybe a trickle, maybe 10 barrels of water a day. It's not a lot. That needs to go somewhere. And the most economical thing for that is disposal, injection, and injection is the best available technology by the EPA. I mean, it is approved and the best available technology.
Now, Greg brings up a good point, but I'll add to that. In certain parts of the country, they do recycle their own water, but you can't do that forever. You can't keep taking that water and recycling that water. It scales up. It doesn't work as well in a lot of cases.
That's true. I mean, you gotta remember that the key to producing water is salinity. It's 5 times as salty as the ocean. And so that really impacts what you can do with it and the cost of treating it. And so if you keep using it, 5 becomes 10. I mean, the concentration goes up to the point where that just becomes very difficult to use. So there's definitely that point as well. It's not infinitely recyclable unless you start addressing the salts. And that's when you get to the other gentleman's question about distillation. You can only get rid of salt in a very few ways. One of them is distillation, which is incredibly energy intensive and expensive.
All right, we'll do one last question.
Yeah, just on the topic of reuse. So I guess you're saying if they're just constantly recycling, has to do with your goal. So if you're trying to just recycle on site, do you guys have targets in terms that you're trying to remove just suspended solids, going all the way to the most expensive for back into the environment? So I guess, do you guys have certain targets you meet, or is everything site specific?
Varies by site. It does because of the quality of water that varies so substantially throughout the country. TDS is total dissolved solids. That's how you measure the dirtiness, if you will, of the water. I don't know how else to say it. And the water in Colorado is not that bad. If you go back to the Marcellus in Pennsylvania, it's really dirty water. Henceforth, you can also extract chemicals.
Yeah, so the TDS to 200 grams per liter there, where here it's only 20 grams per liter. But
Right.
So in terms of basically some of the basic treatments you guys are doing now for reuse, I mean, do you guys have specific targets? So in terms of trying to develop treatments, what are your guys' goals? And is it just reusing raw produce or flowback water here in the DJ, or do you guys have specific goals you try to meet with your treatment technologies for just on-site reuse?
It's customer specific. We actually customize our water treatment solutions to the customer, to the exact situation that they need. So what they do is they give us their existing water quality, and then they tell us, we need it to look like this. Or they say, we need it to go away. And then we find a solution out. Maybe they need it to go away because they know there's no injection, they know there's no recycled value, they need us to treat it to a quality that we can put it back in the environment. So we don't have any, as a company, do we have any goals? No. Our only goal is to meet the needs of the customer. They define the water quality they need on recycle.
And just, sorry, one last thing. And just in terms of reuse on site, is it mainly suspended solid, just so the water appears clean, nothing dissolved, they don't care?
Yeah, basically, the first level of recycle is you remove suspended solids, oil, water, you remove the free-floating hydrocarbons, and you may, a lot of times, they'll do some iron removal. That seems to be a big one. And then that's about it. Then they keep going.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jim, I want to thank you so much.
Oh, sure.
For giving me such a thoughtful talk.